This is going to be the most unique opportunity in your career. And when I say something like that, I mean there will be a specific period of 2 to 3 years in the next decade that will be the greatest period of time for someone studying the trends, the clues for what happens next. And that's because we're about to enter a period of chaos-induced recharting. Let me explain. First of all, chaos creates a new opportunity. It does so by changing the rules, reshuffling the deck, and switching who's in the lead. And here is how it works. Consider a lesson in history. The Renaissance period emerged from the bubonic plague. The Roaring Twenties emerged from the Spanish flu. And now, with COVID-19 finally showing us a light at the end of the tunnel, the Roaring Twenties are coming back, and this period of chaos is about to repeat itself. This historic pattern where afterwards people emerge from their shells, they try new things, they make up for lost time. This is going to be the greatest period of opportunity in your lifetime. And I know this because I study chaos. I study chaos, and I want to leave you with a couple thoughts before we dive in to the top 20 trends for 2022. The first is that normally, and for the last decade, we're in a period of path dependency where we repeat all the past decisions. In our organizations, we put in rules, policies, structures, procedures, brand standards to repeat whatever led to last year's harvest. If you try to come up with something new, you might be told, we're not big enough to do that, or we're not small enough to nimbly, entrepreneurially try your idea. You might be told, this isn't related to us, we can't do that, we need focus, we need to hit goals, we want results. Normally, what happens is we stick to the path that we're on and we miss out on a new opportunity. But then when we go through a period of crisis, like the bubonic plague, like the Spanish flu, and now like COVID-19, well, rules, policies, structures, they just don't seem to matter anymore. People instead try to figure out how to survive within their organizations. Yet during this time period, consumer needs are changing by the minute, because people don't know what they want anymore. If anything, you can't even read it perfectly because they're on the bottom rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, looking out for their physiological needs and their safety. But then we get to the light at the end of the tunnel, the period that we're in now, which is a moment of chaos and opportunity, a period that will last 1 or 2 years as people emerge. We will learn what your competitors were working on behind closed doors for the last 18 months as they figured out what new ideas, products, services, and partnerships they needed to survive in a new normal. You'll figure out what your competitors and others thought the new normal was going to be, and meanwhile, consumers will make up for lost time and show us what they're actually seeing. That is the period of chaos, and chaos is actually predictable. If you're a regular trend hunter follower, you know of our 6 patterns of opportunity and chaos and our mega trends, and today we're going to dive into how those have evolved through COVID. I'm going to give you a very high-level thought about it, and then Armida Scano, our Chief Insight Officer, will show you her read on 20 of the most exciting insights from our 2022 report out today. The first megatrend I want to talk about is simplicity. After a year and a half of chaotic times at home, at work, in life, people start looking for the simple answers, the simple messages, and for marketers, simplicity emerges from all of the noise. When it comes to experience, another mega trend we were watching, if you rewind 2 years ago, we were talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, and all the different multiverse expansions of our world. And yet, so much of that was put on hold because we were working from home. Now we make up for lost time. Next up, naturality. COVID-19 taught the world we're little tiny people in a giant planet that still has so much control and ability to completely change our lives. And that's caused a resurgence, particularly among the younger generations who think the parent generations messed COVID up, a resurgence among the younger generations in that drive for eco and sustainability. And it means that as we get out of this world where everything needs to be triple packaged and double masked up, as soon as we get out of that, people will be more conscious of the brands, the services, the products that actually have an eco component. From a technology perspective, we've seen many records being pushed throughout the last year. In fact, this was a record-breaking year for artificial intelligence, and technology did not stop, even if human connections did. Next up, hybridization. This megatrend is about how the competitive lines change. It used to be there were tech companies and grocery stores, but then you see them merge, and you see things like Amazon, a tech company, buying a grocery store. That's called hybridization, and it's about people completely jumping into new product markets. And what you've seen in the last year is many brands struggling for their survival started to jump into different industries. The little restaurant down the street became a bottle shop, a takeout service, a cooking class, whatever it might be. And now you're about to see, after 18 months of your competitors working behind closed doors, what new markets they plan to get into as well. Finally, many to many, well, there's been a lot of supporting the largest e-commerce retailers in the world, and now you're going to see that return to shopping local to support those local businesses. Those are some of the high-level mega trends, but we've launched our 2022 trend report, which gets a layer deeper to give you 100 different insights and about 500 examples. You'll all get the link to that right after this if you didn't download it already. And we're going to go through 20 of our favorite trends from there, with an interview with Armida Ascano, again, our Chief Insight Officer. Now, just a little note on the methodology. Everything that you're looking at is fresh, data-driven research based on our read of what we're seeing the crowd actually interested in. We have a couple 100,000 people and millions of fans all around the world that submit in their articles. We have a database of about 500,000 articles and ideas, and then we mine that using the patterns of traffic, the people that are actually navigating our site. So far, we've measured about 230 million people and 3 billion of their choices to come up with fresh data-driven insights that we mine with humans and with artificial intelligence. We did about 2,000 or 3,000 custom trend reports during COVID, so we spent a lot of time working with yourselves and your competitors to figure out what's next. And today, with this report, we're revealing some of what we've seen as the higher level, more consistent patterns. If you want to dive deeper after this, connect with us. Our most common service is fast custom research. The idea that you use one of our researchers on our team who gets to know you and delivers a report every week or every month for you. But we're also happy to be there to help you with innovation workshops, getting your people back in office and bringing that zest and excitement for innovation back to your team. Finally, we do a lot of different work with our assessments, our tools, our e-learning, and we're happy to find ways to get that to you if there's ways that would help you win in 2022. With that being said, it is my pleasure to introduce Armida Ascano, our Chief Content Officer. Armida?
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Yes, so my name is Armida Ascano. I am the Chief Content Officer here at Trend Hunter. Now, essentially what that means, every piece of content that comes out of Trend Hunter, from our micro trends on our online magazine to our insights, which is what we're about to show you, to, of course, our frameworks regarding those larger trend opportunities like micro-generational study, retail trends, all sort of funnels through myself and my teams. Now, as Jeremy said, today we're going to be talking about the top trends of 2022. So, of course, that report is available for download. We also have a video that's being released. What we're doing today is specifically showing you the best of each of our categories within these top trends of 2022. So we'll be focusing on key areas such as social good. We'll be looking at retail. We'll be looking at many different categories, all within which we'll be highlighting the most exciting, most interesting trends that we've found through our database. So, Jeremy, let's kick it off with culture trends.
All right, culture trends.
Yeah, so as we move into, obviously, this exciting but unknown era, this return of the Roaring '20s, what are some larger behavioral shifts that you're most excited to see?
Sure. Well, I find culture has been a category in Trend Hunter that was always important. And I think we got what culture was like in the last year, which was being pent up from home. But I feel like culture is truly the category that will exude this idea of the Roaring '20s and people making up for lost time in so many different categories. But it's also one that for most of our clients, suddenly, if it was never really a place people asked a lot of questions, now they're asking a ton because there's a lot of curiosity about what will the lives look like of you, me, and most importantly, our consumers. So why don't you dive in and show us what the data has taught us?
For sure. I mean, consumer behavior is sort of what's at the core of all culture trends, right? And as you mentioned, a lot of this has to do with people sort of reflecting on their own worlds and thinking of what their priorities should be during this time. Now, as Jeremy referenced, we are looking at the return of this sort of Roaring '20s, but that comes after a period of a bit of a dip in society in terms of, consumer behavior, perhaps in terms of the economy, and of course, over this past year, we saw that crisis of the pandemic. Now, during that time, we all became quite attached to the supercomputers stuck in our back pockets at all times. And we could turn to our smartphones, these supercomputers, and connect with what was essentially bad, if not at least uncertain news. And, a lot of us fell into this pattern of constantly doom scrolling, which is the act of constantly, looking at your phone, scrolling through it, and looking for that bad news. Now, after a couple of years of that, we're seeing the trend of anti-doom scroll. Here we see brands and designers launching initiatives to help create sort of distance between people and their phones, their bad news machines. So we see limit-setting mobile apps, we see tech disconnection publications, we see anti-doom scrolling websites that specifically only highlight good news, and we see joyful travel websites, which kind of curate specifically content that is meant to make you happy. Now, I'm ready for this. I'm sure many of you are. But before we move on to the next trend, I want to point out our scoring on the bottom sort of row there of your screen. So as you can see, anti-doom scroll receives a score of 6.2 out of 10, which we find by leveraging popularity, which is the sheer amount of clicks, eyeballs that this article has received. Activity, which is all about engagement. Are people starting a conversation around this trend? Are they sharing it to their various social media feeds? Are they leaving comments? And freshness, which speaks to its level of newness. All right, so let's keep it moving into our second trend within culture, which is nature novice. Now, this ties to the megatrend Jeremy talked about of simplicity. This idea that during this time, people have sort of reprioritized and thought about what is actually important to them. How can they live lives that are a little bit less complicated? And many are quite literally turning to nature as the sort of source of true simple pleasure. Here we see adventure tourism brands offering more slow-paced trips for those who are looking to get into this sort of naturalistic approach to vacation in a way that's, offering a beginner's pace. I am someone who is definitely looking more for a hike that is easy, something I can do, with my parents maybe, as opposed to something that's a little bit more intense. So we see beginner-friendly adventure trips, Japanese moderate adventure tours, slower-paced cycling trips, and Irish adventure tourism companies. And perhaps the most exciting of all of the culture trends, maybe one of the most divisive, is psychedelic expansion. So here we see researchers and entrepreneurs exploring the benefits of magic mushrooms. Now, the reason why I thought it was interesting to include this trend among our culture section is because over the past couple of years, we've seen a transformation of people's relationship with the alcohol industry, people's relationship with the cannabis industry. So the question is, what comes next? Especially during a time when people are looking to reprioritize what it means to live a fulfilled life. Perhaps they're entertaining this idea of psychedelic exploration. And this isn't as odd as it sounds. Now, we're not necessarily suggesting everyone who is watching right now needs to explore the world of psychedelics, but it is telling of how people are thinking of what's accepted in the mainstream during this roaring 20s era. So we see legally harvested magic mushrooms. We see 3-day digital psychedelic conferences. We see tie-dyed mushroom sandwiches and boundary-pushing wellness shows. Now that wraps us up for our culture section. Up next, we have technology. Jeremy, how have you seen technology transform in the crisis and chaos era, and what do you think that'll mean for the recharting?
Well, in the keynote and workshop side, we've done a lot of work with brands like Cisco or IBM, Microsoft, who are working behind the scenes with a lot of the consumer-facing brands, and it's been interesting to sort of be implanted in what they're all actually working on from a technology standpoint. I think what happened over the last year is that as CEOs started wondering if they have the right products, services, and consumers, they started expanding the consideration set for what types of technology could be explored. So we've actually seen new commitments to technology expanding into services that you wouldn't see yet because it takes a year to two to get anything decent size actually implemented. But I would say that there's been a much higher tolerance of risk, and consistently when we look at the time periods that have emerged from global crisis, there are higher periods of risk because people are trying to increase their optionality for whatever might happen in the future. So I think that technology companies are happy to see much larger commitments and budgets to trying new things, and we're about to see that actually play out. And that's the company side. On the simple side, this year, everyone's grandma and everyone's aunt and uncle and nephew figured out not just Zoom, but whatever apps were being used for the families to play games. So I feel like the world just upgraded its tech skills.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because it's completely out of necessity, right? I think that one of the things about technology is that although we have, as a society, come to rely on it quite a bit, this past year was a question of safety. Right, technology enables physical distance. Technology enables lower touch points in industries where typically you need many physical touch points. So we saw a lot of that, I'd say, in Crisis and Chaos as well. And you'll see some of that, of course, in the trends that I've selected. Now, first off, I want to talk about metaverse expansion. This takes that idea of technology enabling distance, but still providing a sense of experience to that next level. For those who are unfamiliar, metaverse is a term that refers to essentially the internet as we know it, however, in a way that's more parallel to the way we actually interact with each other on a day-to-day basis. So within a metaverse, you're able to integrate more person-to-person interaction, though virtual. You're able to integrate perhaps more attention to virtual clothing, which is the first example we see within metaverse expansion. Essentially, metaverse expansion is about different brands investing and developing metaverse products and experiences. And, you know, even calling metaverse products is still something that's so new. Now, as I said, our first example is actually within the fashion space, and it's blockchain-based virtual sneakers. So this is a sneaker that does not actually exist in the physical world, but it does exist in the metaverse. We have user-owned virtual real estate. So similar to what we see with the virtual sneaker, this is real estate that does not exist in the real world, but rather strictly in the virtual world. We see futuristic second Earth concepts, this idea of taking Earth to a virtual space. And we see long-term metaverse visions. Now, it's interesting because I think smaller scale versions of the metaverse that we're all perhaps more familiar with are most typically seen in video games. Fortnite is a metaverse, Minecraft is a metaverse, Roblox is a metaverse. So it's really interesting to see how that expands outside of this industry. And of course, this is a very popular trend, as you can see with the score. So a lot of attention being paid to this one. Now, taking things back to the actual tangible physical world, we have robot retail. Now, you know, just then, Jeremy and I both talked a little bit about this idea that technology needed to be applied across many different industries for safety purposes. And really what we saw in these industries, where typically we had been asked about technology for them for years and years now, is an acceleration of ideas they already had in the pipeline, but hadn't paid that much attention to. That's exactly what we see with robot retail. Here we see the pandemic accelerating the use of robots in retail, specifically in North America. Now, this was something that was quite normal to see in Asian countries. You know, this idea of having this sort of human-free convenience store, for example, is a trend that we actually saw on Trend Hunter back in 2018. Which was from China. But now we're seeing an expansion for North American retail companies who are looking to use robots as a way to enable a sense of safety for consumers and look to cut costs as well. Now, that is a great segue specifically into our retail trends. Now, retail, of course, is perhaps one of the most impacted industries over this past couple of years, and inevitably it'll continue to change. But what changes do you predict for retail in 2022, Jeremy?
Well, for those of us that tuned into our Future Festival World Summit, one of the things I opened with was showing the list of 500 brands, mostly retailers, that went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Now, that doesn't mean that you're gone, but it means that you're in a restructuring period, and among those include many of the shopping mall operators, a lot of the big box stores. And what's interesting is at the very same time, the end consumer purchased so often from the big boxes or the Amazons and Walmarts, and then saw their actual street sides get decimated in terms of for lease signs and stores coming up. So I think what's interesting about retail is that you have to approach it by thinking of the large companies as well as the little guys, the mom and pop shops. In many countries, USA and Canada included, there were also a lot of initiatives pushed by brands like or companies like Shopify to help the little retailers actually get online and have their own online shop. So actually in Canada, the most valuable company on our stock market that's shot past all of the banks and oil companies is actually Shopify, because so many entrepreneurs saw that as their lifeline. Thousands, millions of entrepreneurs literally had that as their lifeline. So I think what you're going to see is that previously the large companies had an online component and then had to win in the store, and then they won in online because you went to the big brand that you went to. But now you're going to see all the mom and pop shops return, but freshly armed with an online website, maybe an expanded product suite that they started adapting to during COVID. And so what I think that you're going to see that is talked about less than it should be is a proliferation of where competition is coming from. And I think you'll see the support for the individual consumers to say, yeah, I want to shop at the mom and pop shop, which is not the news that a lot of our brand retail clients want to actually hear. Hey, you have a million new competitors now. Right. But I think that's the reality of what to prepare for.
For sure. I spending so much time with our insights have a tendency to come at all industries from this sort of consumer behavior mindset first. And what I find interesting is that though it is true, there is this push to get more sort of technologically advanced in the retail space. I think consumers will have this sort of push and pull between a desire for that convenience that they've become accustomed to and a desire for that sort of technological advancement up against a desire for retail experiences, up against this desire to feel more of a human connection when you go shopping, especially in an era where, although we're trending toward more safety in so many parts of the world, I think for many individuals, it's if I'm going to go out shopping, the actual experience of shopping needs to be worth it to get me out of the house, right? And that's a lot of what we see in the trends that I've put together for this. So first off, we have Retail Escape. Here we see opportunities for very creative presentations of products being more abundant in virtual environments. So this is a sort of compromise between what I was saying, that push and pull of very convenient, very safe, technologically advanced retail versus this desire for that experience and this humanization. So what we see is, yes, virtual spaces where you can shop that are presented in these very artistic manners. So perhaps it's a very high-end fashion brand that is inviting you to a beautifully designed boutique that you can tour virtually, but it's also a shoppable space. Perhaps it's a digital fashion house where you have a sort of studio for an exclusive designer, and you can click in and see details on the specific fabrics being used and the processes, meet the seamstresses, but still it is a shoppable website. One of my favorite examples, and not just because I was playing the video game quite a bit, is we're seeing a lot of brands, retail brands, on Animal Crossing, which is a video game that is actually technically a metaverse, so we're going full circle, meeting people where they are in terms of their digital behavior over this past year, and still providing that sense of fun, that sense of humanization in a space that is easy to access and is still technologically advanced. Now, going in a different direction here and focusing only on the experience, we see shoppable experience, where brands are creating both in-person or virtual experiences that consumers can shop. So, for example, we have a shoppable luxury video. It's technically a music video with Celine Dion, but the actual music video is shoppable. So a piece of content that would have already been very shareable, especially during a time when we're all still stuck to our computers and our phones, except now you can actually shop through it. We have shoppable Korean hotels, so acknowledging that yes, things are starting to open. Perhaps not everything needs to be a virtual experience. We can provide in-person experiences, but people still want to be able to envision themselves living a life that is once again peaceful and adventurous and on vacation simultaneously, and making that space shoppable itself. We have shoppable rentable housing, which I find very, very interesting. Now, without getting into, generational information, we're seeing a lot of millennials specifically looking for more flexible ways of living. And if a temporary way of life is something that's just normalized now, why not make those temporary spaces shoppable as well? And of course, interactive shoppable cooking shows. I know many people, myself included, experimented quite a bit with cooking and their culinary skills while locked down at home, so why not make those videos shoppable as well? So that takes us out of our retail trends and into our next category of eco. Jeremy, I know this is one of your favorites. How do we define sustainability in this new world, in the roaring 20s?
Right. You know, eco is so interesting. It's passionate to my heart. I've got the solar panel roof and the electric car and all of the things I can do that aren't enough. But what I found then to be so painstaking is that this year people thought was going to be better for eco. Oh, people are at home, there's no commuting. But then when the results came through, what actually happened is that we were using way more packaging, and there was a shortage in supplies, and everyone was stockpiling, and there's a billion masks floating in the sea or something. That's the scary way of seeing it. That's the doom scrolling. You got to go anti-doom scroll to get away from that.
I'll get you an app that gets you away from your phone.
But I do think that this is going to be the example where there's a rebellion, and once we get through this enough around the world, then people, younger generations, provably, expectedly care more about the sustainable world we're in. And I think that they will push even farther, the Greta generation, if you will, to make sure that brands are actually adapting some of the eco principles that they stand for. And for that younger generation, COVID looks like it was something mismanaged drastically by the parents. That's the easiest way I like to sort of envision it. I keep saying that because I think it's a simple way to imagine how then they become more aware of eco and they demand change versus sitting in the back seat.
Right. I completely agree with you there. I think that even, again, you know, taking it to like a consumer mindset sort of approach, I think many people in the beginning of the pandemic just kind of accepted that, okay, I'm going to use single-use products because it's safer. And I'm going to accept that, you know, the products I'm interacting with have a lot more packaging because I'm concerned about actually touching things other people have touched and, you know, that sort of thing. And I think as the pandemic continued on, individuals started feeling a sense of guilt for that behavior, for that sort of permission that we all granted ourselves to use all of these single-use products and be kind of irresponsible from an environmental perspective, and are now coming back a lot harder with what they expect. Now, one of the things that I find most exciting about the eco trends that we saw in this report is that we're seeing a much quicker turnaround and a much more creative approach to sustainability from brands. So I want to kick off with zero waste cosmetic. And I selected this trend to talk about today because the cosmetic industry notoriously needs to move faster and faster as online communities focus on makeup. There are these entire spaces dedicated to influencers and micro-influencers and sometimes just normal people who just want to post pictures of their makeup artistry setting the trends. And so in an industry that's already learned to move quite quickly, it makes sense to then integrate these very fast sort of turnarounds of more eco-conscious practices. That's what we see with zero waste cosmetic. The cosmetic industry now producing zero waste products, zero waste packaging in a few creative ways. So we see zero waste beauty packaging. We see actual zero waste products, zero waste eyeliners. We see zero waste beauty platforms specifically spotlighting brands in the cosmetic space that offer zero waste products. We see zero waste beauty packaging again and zero waste beauty membership, so sort of subscription model for those who know that no matter what kind of makeup they want to experiment with, they want it to be as eco-friendly as possible. One of the other things I love about zero waste cosmetic is it kind of harkens back to the ancient practices of makeup and the fact that makeup used to be made using natural materials. So it's interesting. We see, you know, a sort of return to a sense of simplicity once again. Now, it's not just in the cosmetics industry where we see these more sort of creative approaches to sustainability. One of the most creative approaches that we've seen here is repurposed species. So this is very interesting. Here we see brands across many different industries using invasive species to create products and sort of help rebalance the environment. So, for example, we have bioconcrete tiles. We have starfish-based ice melters. We have fish-based dog foods using, again, species that are invasive. And we have invasive carp-based dog foods as well. So next up, we get to a new category of social good. So in a way related to the eco that we just talked about, but social good saw a huge renewal over this past couple of years. Again, we saw a lot of people at home sort of reflecting on how they can help make the world a better place, not just exist in the world and do whatever they plan to do. So many people use time on lockdown to reflect in this way. Do you believe, Jeremy, that this pace and enthusiasm for being a catalyst for positive change will remain?
Well, I certainly hope so. Trend Hunter has a sub-brand called socialbusiness.org, which is actually one of our categories, where we've covered a couple thousand businesses that are not a charity per se, but rather businesses that embed that charitable model within them. Think Tom's shoes, buy a pair of shoes, and then a kid in a less privileged country also gets a pair of shoes. Look at that. See, there we go. It worked. Now, what we believe is that this time away from the office, working from home, has caused also an increase in the number of side hustles, side gigs, and probably young entrepreneurs thinking about what they could actually do. And so often those new businesses come with that charitable model as the world's been shifting towards that. So I don't have a favorite example that's come yet out of COVID, but I am hoping to see more examples in the next, let's say, year.
Right. I feel the exact same way. It has been definitely a silver lining of this past year to see so many people, so many organizations, and so many brands mobilize in this way for the causes that they believe in, and I hope it lasts. I think that it will. As you've said many times, the younger generation has sort of seen, questionable practices from older generations in the past and has this renewed mission to keep it going. So I do believe that we'll kind of continue with this focus and this enthusiasm for positive change in general. Now, one of my favorite examples here is Mutual Aid Network, because I think it is a very simplistic, straightforward way to provide support to marginalized communities. Now, what we saw during the pandemic is organizations supporting and launching various approaches to mutual aid networks. Now, one of the first ones I want to spotlight, I'm so proud of because it exists in Trend Hunter's hometown of Toronto. So we see Toronto-based community fridges, which are just available all across the city. And as I said, one of my favorite things about this trend is how simplistic the actual examples are. It is community fridges. You know exactly what that means. Find the location of a community fridge, bring some food over to it, drop it in there, and that fridge is available for anyone in the community who needs to find something to eat. What an awesome example. We also have neighborhood support networks. We see UK-based mutual aid networks and grassroots mutual aid funds, which don't focus specifically on these kinds of resources of shelter or food, but also actual money provided to individuals who perhaps don't have the same opportunities that we do. Now, another example here is charitable NFTs. Now, NFTs have been a huge discussion point over this past year. Stands, of course, for non-fungible token. And one of the best ways to describe it is an NFT is kind of like a collectible card. So through various checkpoints online, an item is sort of confirmed, sort of clarified as authentic and a one-to-one piece. So that is what we're seeing in the charity space, NFTs being auctioned off with profits donated to NGOs and nonprofit organizations. So we see virtual tipping NFTs, which is from Stella Artois. We see signature virtual sneakers. We see charitable snack-themed NFTs and charitable definition NFTs. So let's move on to food and beverage trends. I hinted to this earlier. I'm definitely one of the people who experimented with their culinary skills, especially in the first half of the pandemic. And I think that speaks to two major themes we've seen here. So renewed interest in DIY and a renewed interest in wellness. So Jeremy, what do these mean to you? How do you think they'll transform in 2022?
Well, we've seen that surge in people learning how to cook themselves. We've seen restaurateurs giving their lessons, their recipes away online as a way to stay connected with their end consumers, their diners. We've also seen in past research, which we confirmed in survey research, something called a return to the kitchen, which is that when you go through crisis, you start rethinking about what's important to you. Family sticks, and even though you're going to go out and enjoy all the restaurants you can, you're going to keep that sacred Sunday evening meal, which is interesting. And then, yes, after a year and a half, depending on where you are, of living at home with your own indulgences, we've seen some people go super healthy and others not so much. So suddenly making conscious choices like the seltzer movement versus beer is starting to actually get a lot of traction. This year saw a huge abundance of seltzers with dozens and dozens of new brands, pretty much every beer maker getting in with their new healthy seltzer drinks. And some of them are actually starting to add in to create nutraceuticals where they're putting in whether it's vitamins or healthy ingredients so that you can live that dream of getting healthier while imbibing with your friends. So that's what spikes out to me. But I do feel like it's another category where people are suddenly focused a little bit more than they were 2 years ago.
Right. One of the interesting things that I've seen, and for those of you who have visited when we were in person, logged into a Future Festival event over this past couple of years. Typically, I specialize in generational trends. In the food and beverage space, there have been a lot of sort of, not, I'd say, separations between generations, but stick-out behaviors among specific generations. So, for example, Generation X has seen a really renewed interest in wellness and their approach to food. We've also seen among Gen X this mission to start cooking with their kids as a way to sort of encourage togetherness. So I think combining those two things, it makes a lot of sense. I'm cooking with my kids, and I want to have this more wellness-focused approach for their sake. Almost on the opposite end, you have my generation, the millennials, who decided to just sort of, maybe I'll add things to my food to make it more healthy, but in general, I want to enjoy myself through the food and the drink that I'm consuming. I definitely fall in that category. I'm very guilty of that. And then, of course, with the rise of TikTok and food TikTok specifically, Gen Z has this interest in sort of creativity and how food can provide a sense of self-expression. So a lot of interesting things from a generational perspective, for sure. Speaking of generations, the first trend that I have here for food and beverage is blue zone living, which, for those of you who are unaware, a blue zone is a region on the planet where typically people grow to a much older age than everywhere else. So a new approach to sort of wellness and to eating and to drinking is seen with sort of mimicking the eating habits that we see in blue zones, and that becoming a sort of diet approach in itself. So brands optimizing these experiences to facilitate longer and better lives. So we see high quality artisan pasta boxes, speaking to a blue zone within Italy. We see longevity-focused wellness spa retreats, longevity-focused diets, which is the actual Blue Zone's kitchen, and Blue Zones-focused organizations, which provide a sort of holistic way of approaching your life with that sort of Blue Zone state of mind. Now, another approach to this is reduced cooking. So reduced cooking takes that sort of reemergence of DIY, that return to the kitchen that Jeremy spoke about, and combines it with the needs of that sort of eco-consciousness. We're seeing popular chefs create and collaborate with brands to prioritize the use of food waste. So we see waste-reducing celebrity chefs. We see sparkling whey drinks, speaking to those seltzers Jeremy talked about earlier, but these are specifically using sort of food waste from other processes and other beverages. Health-focused vegan drive-thrus, where what we're doing is using, the fruits and vegetables that don't make it to the grocery store, and IKEA's famous food scrap cookbook, which I actually downloaded. I gave it a good try. Honestly, I wound up opting for takeout because, like I said, I'm an indulgent millennial. But Food Scrap Cookbook is actually free to download on IKEA's website, so highly recommend.
I'm picturing the directions you see in an IKEA assembly catalog.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and it's beautifully designed too, of course. All right, so up next we get to one of my favorite categories, which is fashion and cosmetic trends. So this industry, similar to the retail space, sustained huge changes during the chaos phase. Which of those shifts did you see, and which is your favorite?
Haircuts. That's going to be a wild one for everyone. And I don't have as much to contribute to this category, but I will tell you what I loved seeing was there was a surge in eye makeup and a dramatic drop in lipstick because of everyone, all of us wearing a mask. So I think this is a better... I'll say one note from past periods of crisis, though, which is very interesting. So Zara, which I had done a lot of case studying on in my book Better and Faster, has all the data in the planet of all the colors and all the preferences. And they had noted that normally color preferences are similar everywhere except French women like a black and white, and in South America their desire for color. But there's also research that out of periods of crisis, people do have a desire for more colorful and joyful clothing. If you go back to the Roaring 20s, there's also this idea of total exuberant dress codes and the flapper movement. All these things happened in a period of chaotic cultural reawakening.
Right. I mean, I think strictly from a design perspective, that idea of wanting excess during, post-downturn periods is something we're already seeing. If you're a person who spends any time on TikTok, right, depending on what your algorithm is showing you, you may have noticed this sort of resurgence in early and mid-2000s fashion, which is notably, how do I say this gently, loud. Is notably loud, and I actually lived through it. I had some of those clothes in that original period, and they're coming back, which I think is surprising to those of us who look back on photos of us in those clothes and cringe, like myself, but I think it makes a lot of sense because it definitely was a period of very loud colors. It was a period of excess. It was a period where the clothes didn't necessarily need to be functional. They just needed to draw attention. They just needed to make a statement. So that is definitely one exciting design trend in the fashion and cosmetic space. I wanted to take a different approach for the trends that I showed for you all today by continuing to sort of highlight that connection between the fashion and cosmetic world and what we see in the sort of social goods space, what we see in the eco space. So dead stock garment is an insight that shows brands salvaging and upcycling dead stock textiles to support a sense of sustainability, yes, but also to provide an element of exclusivity. If there is a garment that has been dead stocked, which means it is discontinued, however, you can have that textile sort of repurposed into a completely new piece, well, that's a way to not only live a more sustainable life, but to also get a piece of fashion culture, which of course is especially important to consumers today who spent the past year perhaps looking at their interests more as hobbies and learning more about these areas that they were only casually interested in the past. Now, another example here is prebiotic serum. So for this, we look at the cosmetic space, specifically the skincare space. And here we see an ingredient that was huge within the wellness space and within supplements now being used specifically in skincare. So skincare serums, including prebiotics, in order to let probiotics thrive. So I love this because it shows a crossover between the world of, yes, food and beverage, also wellness, also supplements, and the skincare space. And I think that's a really great example of this sort of hybridization that Jeremy was speaking about earlier in our introduction there. Which, of course, is a great segue into health and wellness. So in the health and wellness space, the concept of self-care reigns supreme. I believe March 2020 saw the peak in the most Google searches for the term self-care because it was the first month of us really sort of understanding what's happening with the pandemic and understanding we need to take care of ourselves in the crisis phase. How do you define self-care?
Well, it's interesting because if you asked me a couple years ago, I would have thought of it being simply more some of the physical and beauty-related regimens that a person gets into. But with mental health really surging to the forefront this year, I think that self-care also, for me and others, starts to incorporate all the things that you're actually doing to ensure that you're in a positive mindset in the right space, dealing with everything that's happening. And so from that standpoint, this has been a big test of a year in the areas that have already come out, areas of America that are fully open. The reports that are coming back would be that the human mind is actually much better at rebounding than what you would have expected. And there's certain ways to actually study your resilience and how quickly people bounce back. And the good news for anyone still in an area more locked down, you'll bounce back sooner than you think. But I think that self-care is an area that sort of helped people get through what happened to us in this last year and a half. And so I'm really interested in what continues and what habits stick with people and what new tolerances for others we've started to build in to sort of everything that we've become.
Definitely hit the nail on the head. I even myself, someone who has always kind of enjoyed the idea of self-care. A couple of years ago, that was mostly about a spa day, if I'm being completely honest with myself. But, over lockdown, it's really been much more about that sense of holistic wellness. Actually, one of our futurists, Taryn Boyd, hi Taryn if you're watching, they have a really awesome presentation on self-care, where self-care is also positioned as something that can help you care for your community as well. So, self-care is not just a concept that's about self-indulgence and about taking care of yourself, not even just physically, but also mentally. It's about how doing so will enable you to make the world a better place in general. Now, I think what we're both saying is that self-care can no longer just be about physical aspects. It needs to be more expansive. We definitely saw that with meditation pairing. So here we see that, yes, although we've always had apps that were dedicated to helping people with maintaining a sense of calm and guiding people through the process of learning how to meditate, we were seeing brands that were not necessarily in that space finding ways to sort of pair with meditation apps. So, we saw dating app meditations, for example. We saw soothing working from home features where perhaps software that you needed to use now that you're working in a virtual office also integrated a sense of mental wellness, meditative friendship apps. And I love this trend because it sort of acknowledges that taking care of your mental health isn't something that can just be placed in a vacuum. It needs to be present in every aspect of your life. Now, another great example here that focuses more on the sort of physical wellness that we need to pay attention to, especially in the face of our recent sort of crisis and chaos, is accessible vaccination. Now, the accessibility of vaccinations, of course, varies across different parts of the world. And I saw in our comments there, we have a lot of folks from a lot of different places around the world. But here what we're seeing is branded offerings and features aiming to make the vaccine accessible in many different ways, in many different areas. So we have vaccination finding smart assistants. We have vaccination center hosting restaurants. We have social media vaccine fact boxes, rideshare vaccination partnerships, and even Target getting in on this idea of providing more accommodations for employees who are vaccinated. I know here in Toronto, one of the big accounts on Twitter is actually Vax Hunters. That's been a huge, huge help in people looking to find ways to get vaccinated during these times. So really a really great, really direct focus when it comes to the health and wellness space over the past year.
And what a year it's been. Now, we're going to do a little bit of Q&A, so if you have some questions, send them in. What I would like to say is that I hope you're enjoying our early release of the annual Trend Report. So often we've paired it with our Future Festival World Summit, and I do invite you to go to that. You can get a ticket to the day one virtual part for free, or take part in the full 3-day experience, or join us in real life. But the simple notion of what I wanted to say for why we went early this year is because it does seem like now that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, we wanted to release the research that we've been working on to really help you jump ahead of what we've been in this period to help you get to what's next. Because what's next will be literally a land grab of opportunity. And by studying trends, you're studying the clues that will lead you to the new paths of opportunity. By taking the time to read through this new annual report that we have, you are taking a first step in literally getting in front of whatever's been worked on by your competitors, whatever changes have happened to your consumers. So I applaud you for doing that. And if you don't have the link, maybe one of our teammates will share it right now in the comments. It's the link that says go.trendhunter.com/2022 trend report, but that will take you right to a download. It is 234 pages, so it's going to download for a while, and while it's downloading, I will get thousands of emails every time I release it saying the link doesn't work. The link works. It's just enormous, and it's coming. So with that said, let's jump into some of the Q&A questions, and I'll start with an easy one for you, Army. We just went through a whole bunch of insights. When you went through this and picked, let's talk about these 20 today, of the, I think, 600 insights your team found this year, 100 that you put in the report. What jumped out at you the most in what you were covering today?
Oh my goodness. What jumped out to me the most? That is a tough question. This may not be a satisfying answer. I'm going to go ahead and say one of the overarching themes that really jumped out to me was that across all industries, it is true that there is this sense of excitement, and there is this not just willingness to experiment, because I think, and I'm sure you can agree with this, in the work that we do with our clients, there is always a willingness to experiment. That's why they come to us. But there is this thirst for experimentation, this like excitement to try new things that really jumped out across all industries. Especially, in the eco space, as I said, there were so many creative approaches to how to be more sustainable across different industries. I only showed 2 here, but really, it's a huge highlight of the report that I would definitely recommend everyone looking into. The idea that there is a certain amount of attention being paid to the metaverse, which is like a new concept for the world all around, not just for the tech industry. And I think that sense of excitement, that thirst for experimentation is really my favorite thing across all the trends.
So for me, I very much am wholeheartedly committed and excited about this idea of crisis, chaos, and recharting, and the idea that we went through a distinctly different period and that what's next is different. So for me, the anti-doom scrolling really spoke out, because I think doom scrolling is not something that most of us did before, but it sure was easy during COVID. In fact, my wonderful fiance Taylor made a rule called COVID Tuesdays, and in the house I was only allowed to talk about COVID on Tuesdays because it's too easy to click. Right. So I hadn't thought about the word doom scroll, and when I saw, I believe it was the Tourism Iceland app was the first anti-doom scrolling app that I'd seen. And when I saw it, you clip and you just get all this beautiful B-roll footage of Iceland. You keep flipping. But as you're doing it, so I encourage you to check it out. It's in your report. You can click through. You will just think, wow, look at all this good stuff. This is the opposite of what I was doing. That is correct. So it speaks to crisis, that's doom scrolling, chaos, the new world being anti-doom scrolling, and basically just this resurgence of getting us back to a new reality. I don't want to use the word new normal anymore, but a new reality.
Yeah. Interesting that you don't necessarily want to use the word new normal. I agree with that. I see that one of the questions that we have coming in the chat is, when do you think in-person conferences will become the norm again? And
we are weirdly in the United States absolutely back. Armida and I have a unique experience because we work with so many American clients, but actually Toronto is the world's longest lockdown of a city. We have restaurants open. No, restaurants we were the shortest, but overall lockdown the longest in the world. And so our restaurants are still closed until Friday, which is 400 and something days, but the rest of the city's been under lockdown. And yet in America, they're totally open, and in other countries, they're back to rebattling it. Right. So given the number of people that are on the line right now, I think that's a very difficult question to ask, because it's very different in England, where we've got the Delta coming back, Brazil, where it's not quite figured out, America, where things are back to normal, conferences are happening, and I go to my next event next week in Canada, where we're psychologically intimidated by the lockdown, even though our rates are fine.
Well, the reason why I wanted to single out that question is because of the term the norm. I don't know if it will necessarily, I think the norm, and I appreciate that you're no longer saying new normal because it's true, does imply a return to something familiar. I don't think that we will be returning to something familiar. Do I think that this idea of in-person, not just conferences, but events in general, will be springing up in different parts of the world? Of course. Will the events look extremely different? Absolutely.
Sure. There's something I want to tell you about that I think you'll love if you're coming to our future festival in New York, LA, or Chicago, which are all in November. We saw a lanyard system that we'll be adopting, and it was at another conference, where there's 3 colors of lanyards, and one color means, like, I'm good with high fives and hugs, like, I'm vaccinated, I'm there. But then the other 2 are different levels of sensitivity, so that you could know, are you someone that's back to handshaking yet? Because maybe you're not. So there's probably going to be a phase of adapting where even if you're at a large event, there are considerations that are made to help people in their different stages of recovery.
Interesting.
Okay, I'll ask a question for you. These are all from the audience. Are there, that one's very similar to what we just said. Let me read this next one. In the next 2 years or more of being the Roaring 20s, do you see consumers going into more excesses at home? Are there high price points that are going to be happening, excessive spending? Maybe talk about your thoughts on excess.
Right. I believe that the question is not just about, general excess, but also will that sense of excess in the Roaring 20s impact home life? I think the answer is yes. I think that, in fact, the spending that we do for our homes, and that includes, cleaning products, that includes furniture, that includes the food that we eat, the food that we make, will be one of the main areas where we see more, not necessarily more extravagance and more spending, but more attention being paid and more care, which for some could translate to more excess. So I think one really great example is how many people became so engulfed in the world of houseplants of all things, right, in the early phases of the pandemic. And why? Because it provided a sense of aesthetic beauty in the home, but also a hobby and something that was simultaneously good for us, because taking care of something is obviously really fortifying, but also really beautiful to look at. And I think that that will continue on. I think another great example of more access and more sort of attention paid in the home is the desire to have more sort of specialty grocery items to help you with that return to the kitchen. So we saw a huge boost in specialty direct-to-consumer grocery shopping. So this idea of wanting to get, ethical meats, or wanting to do specifically produce coming straight from the farm. Are people spending more time cooking at home, and is that more affordable in general? Perhaps, but the ingredients are ingredients that people want to be a little bit more special.
Sure.
Right? So excess in the home, I definitely think that'll continue.
I'm working right now on my keynote for Future Festival World Summit. You can go to day one free, shameless plug. But why I wanted to introduce it is because I'm looking at a lot of the patterns that came out of the Roaring '20s, as well as a few other crisis periods. And people think about the excess spending, which is glamorized in something like Great Gatsby. But what's interesting is that's only one of the things. Mm-hmm. What actually happens is it's a proliferation, a mad scramble of everything happening. So on one hand, there were people that were experiencing mass excess, but also there was a period of higher risk taking. There was a period of absolute liberation of women, of blacks getting into actual congressional roles and being able to have full privileges, but at the same time racism. So all of these things started happening in every possible direction, and almost the only thing that jumps out at you is higher risk taking and people doing everything, not sticking to the routine that they were on. So there's some neat takeaways, but I do want to caveat that some of the excess of the Roaring '20s is very much a small segment. That's one little component. There's actually a lot of other things, but they were Roaring '20s because for everyone, it was a time of new habits, new behaviors, and new risk taking.
So in 2021 speak, everyone will be doing the most.
They will be doing themselves at the highest level that they know how to do that. Okay, I'll give you another question. I think this is a fun one. You've covered some of this in what you were saying when you were in the retail section, but someone asked, for the future of retail, do you think people return to malls? Very specific question, or purely shopping local?
Ooh, interesting. I think that instead of thinking about the literal mall, there will be a desire to go back to a shopping space that is a sort of area where you can go with your friends, an area where you can spend like an afternoon or an evening hanging out and yes, shopping together and, going to a food court and eating some food. But like I said with the earlier question about conferences, I don't think it'll be a return to the mall as we know it, just like it won't be a return to a conference or an in-person event as we know it. I think that there will be a need to sort of combine this sort of tech and convenience approach to retail that we've seen, the sort of humanization you get from shopping more locally, and that sort of experience, that social experience you get from malls as we remember them when people start shopping in malls. I do believe that these sort of, let's call them combined shopping spaces, can have more of a local flair to them. There's a really great example actually here in Toronto called Stacked Market, which actually started as a pop-up but has become a permanent fixture because people love it so much. That is technically a mall when you think about it. It's a collection of stores in one area that is attached to...
Oh, you cheated. You gave the answer of shop local and go to a mall.
I am. Jeremy knows because he likes Stacked Market too.
I see.
So it's basically a shopping center of local shops come together in this temporary space of stacked shipping containers. So, but I do think that that is what the future mall will look like.
Sure. So this wraps us up for the time. I thank you very much for what you've devoted in terms of taking that first step of diving into 2022. Armida, if someone wants to engage your client team for a more customized version of one of these reports or presentations, what do you recommend as next steps?
Yeah, so I recommend, of course, if you haven't downloaded the report, download the report. Because if you're thinking of getting more information from us, more services, it's probably going to help you figure out what direction you want to go in. I would definitely visit trendhunter.com/pro. And yeah, check out basically all of our product pages.
All right, thank you very much. Enjoy the report, and I will see you next with Armida when we bring you to Future Festival Virtual in September.